The 2025 Formula One season is just around the corner, and to kick things off is the Australian Grand Prix held at Albert Park. So I wanted to just dive into the history of that race, some storylines we'll want to follow, as well as my predictions for the podium positions for the race. So with that, let's jump into it. And first off, I want to talk about the history of the race. So the Australian Grand Prix has actually been around since 1928, although it wasn't in Formula One until 1985, where they raced at the Adelaide Street Circuit. They raced there until 1996, where they went to Melbourne, where they raced at Albert Park. And they've been racing there every year since then, except for 2020 and 2021. Now that's traditionally been the first season, the season opener, the first race of the season, like it is this year, although it has been a couple of years since that's been the case. Now, for some stats about the track itself, it's 3.82 miles long, or for the Europeans and Canadians, that's just under 5.3 kilometers. The race will be 58 laps and will be taking place on Saturday, March 15th at 9 p.m. Pacific time, which is where I'm located. So the race has been held 87 times, and Ferrari is the winningest constructor, with Michael Schumacher tying, Lex Davison for the most wins, both of them having 4, although Michael Schumacher is the most recent and in the Formula One era, where he won 2000, 2001, 2002, and 2004, so in a very dominant string of his career. Some other interesting things about the Australian Grand Prix is historically there has been some sort of correlation with a driver that performs well in that race and going on to dominate the rest of the season. So we've seen that with Michael Schumacher. We've also seen that with Lewis Hamilton and Jenson Button. And that's no surprise. Obviously, if a driver is going to be doing well and they win the first race, those two things are going to be correlated. But that will be something we can talk about in the trends and storylines we'll want to follow as the race weekend progresses. So what are some storylines we'll want to follow for the Australian Grand Prix? Obviously, because it's the first race of the season, we don't have prior races to look back on. Looking at last season is only so valuable. So we'll really want to take what we learned from preseason testing, or what we think we learned from preseason testing, and try to extrapolate that out for the first race. And the 3 things that I want to focus on are, firstly, McLaren. They looked really strong in preseason testing, and they seem to be the favorites coming into the season. Obviously, they were the last year's constructor champion. They put up a really good fight against Red Bull, even for the drivers, with championship Lando Norris. And with the news that they're going to be paying Oscar Piastri nearly as much as Lando Norris, it will be really interesting to watch the dynamic between the 2 drivers throughout the weekend, as well as the performance of the car, because they shelled out a lot of money for Oscar Piastri, and if they fall flat on their face this race, it's not going to look good for the rest of the season, and could not bode well for them. I don't expect that to be the case. Obviously, again, like I said, they performed really well in preseason testing, and they just seem to have a fast car, a good grasp of the current regulations. The flexi-wing ban isn't in place yet. It's scheduled to take place later this year. So that was one of the big advantages McLaren had over some of their competitors. They have a strong power unit with the Mercedes, and I think historically, I'm not sure how well they've done at the track, but I would think that they're going to get off to a pretty good start this season. Another storyline that I'd love to follow is Williams. They are another team that performed well in preseason testing, and they look to be the favorites for that midfield. Them and Alpine. But as more of a Williams fan than Alpine, I'll focus on them. And with Williams, I really want to see how Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon stack up. So not only will that car be competitive, can it score points on debut this year, but how does Alex Albon fare against Carlos Sainz? Albon is somebody who's gone up against some really tough teammates in the past, such as Max Verstappen, and kind of fallen flat on his face. Though in the past couple of years, he's really outperformed all of his teammates and tended to look like he was outperforming the car itself. But we should take that with a grain of salt because his teammates have been rookies and fairly lackluster. And so there's a lot of people that in the past couple of years have seen him crush his teammates, really drive the hell out of that car and give it all it has. But it's hard to gauge whether the car did have more in it and it just looked like he was maximizing it because his teammates were at such a low caliber comparatively. But Carlos Sainz is somebody who we've seen him go up against the best. He performed really well against Lando Norris. He performed extraordinarily well against Charles Leclerc. And so that will be a really great proxy to see, okay, does Alex Albon, is he performing at the same caliber as these other drivers, or is he a notch below? Obviously, he has the advantage of being the incumbent at the Williams team. He's been there longer. But we saw how quickly Carlos Sainz picked up things at Ferrari. So I would imagine, maybe this race, Alex has an advantage. But if there is any sort of large gap, that I think will probably close up as the season goes on. But that's a season-long storyline that I want to be watching and I'll be keeping track of. But it'll be interesting to see how it goes this first round with qualifying and race performance. And finally, the last huge storyline obviously is this will be Lewis Hamilton's first race in red, which to a lot of fans is either really bittersweet or extraordinarily exciting. It depends who you are and if you valued Lewis or the Mercedes team more, or if you're Tifosi and you're just excited to see him in red. And so, once again, I really want to see how that driver dynamic pairs up, because I think Charles Leclerc is a generational talent, and we know Lewis is. Though Lewis is at the end of his career, I have kind of been of the opinion that he's a little bit slower than he used to be, but it could just be him not gelling well with that Mercedes the last couple of years. I'd love to see him come back and start performing at the caliber that he was in his heyday. But that's going to be a tough ask, especially when he's up against Charles Leclerc, who is one of the fastest drivers in Formula One. Certainly one of the fast single lap qualifiers, which I know is where Lewis has been struggling. But I want to see how this goes. I'm hoping for no crashes. I'm hoping for a clean race, and let's see how well he performs in that car. I'll also love to see how that Ferrari stacks up against the McLaren, the Red Bull, and the Mercedes. So, onto the fun part, the predictions. This is really challenging. I think I'm only going to be predicting the top three in the race. I'm not going to try to predict qualifying and finishing positions past three. That just seems like a little bit too much of an ask to get that right. But I'm going to go with what I saw in preseason testing and what I think is a relatively safe bet. This might be a little bit of my own bias and what I would love to see. But in third place, I'm going to be putting Charles Leclerc. Like I was saying earlier in the video, I rate him really highly, and the Ferrari did look good in preseason testing, but again, you can only judge so much from that. I believe in his ability to perform throughout the season, and I expect him to get a number of wins if the field is as competitive as it was last year. But on the get-go, I think that the McLarens looked like they were performing better, generally speaking. And so that leads into who I'm putting P2, which is Lando Norris. Now he also looked quite good, and it's a little bit of a toss-up between Lando and Oscar for me. I know Oscar is younger, but I'm actually going to be giving him P1 in this race for my prediction, and part of that is the maybe home field advantage. I don't know how much that will actually be an advantage for him or if the nerves get to him. But The McLaren just generally looked extraordinarily strong. Again, like I've mentioned a couple of times in this video in preseason testing, and I think that it will be difficult for any other team to compete with that car. I know 1-2 is tough, but it's the first race of the season, and they seem to just have the largest advantage over anybody else. I'm excited to see how the other cars stack up. I'm looking forward to being surprised. Maybe the Red Bull outperforms. You can never discount Max too far. He is always in with a shot of getting a podium at least, if not winning a race, as long as he's able to finish the race and not have some sort of mechanical issue or puncture of some sort. So we'll see. I think Lewis will also do well. Like I said, I think it might take him a few races to get to all the way up to grips with that car. It's a new car, it's a new team, and so we'll see. I'm hoping he gets a top 5 finish, but there are just so many competitive drivers in that top 5, top 6, and you know, I haven't even mentioned Mercedes here. They could be up in for a chance to do well, if not even challenge the podium. So we'll see. So my picks are Charles P3, Lando P2, and Oscar P1. We'll see if in a few days I'm right, but with that was the rundown of the 2025 Australian Grand Prix. I hope and plan to be doing these for all of the races this season, and maybe even going a little bit more in depth doing things as far as practice and qualifying, but we'll see for the future. But thank you for watching. I really appreciate it.